The late afternoon sunlight poured through the wide glass windows of the busy downtown cafe, filling the small restaurant with a golden glow that made everything seem softer than the city outside. Plates clinked, silverware scraped against china, and the chatter of customers blended with the hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter. Among the waitresses moving quickly between tables was a young woman named Emily, her hair tied back neatly, her apron pressed though faintly stained from a long shift, and her smile warm even though her body ached from hours of work. Emily had been a waitress here for 3 years, ever since she'd lost her mother and had to abandon her college dreams to pay the bills. Life wasn't easy, and she knew every penny she earned mattered, but she carried herself with dignity, serving each guest as though they were the most important person in the room. What she didn't know was that today, fate was about to put her in the path of 2 people who would change her entire life. At a corner table by the window, a man in a sharp-tailored suit sat stiffly, his phone buzzing constantly beside him, but his eyes were not on the screen. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and handsome in that cold, intimidating way that only power and wealth could shape. This was Alexander Reed, one of the youngest CEOs in the city, a man known for his ruthless decisions in the boardroom, his impeccable business empire, and his inability to let anyone close. To the world, he was a giant, untouchable, commanding, but at that moment, he looked more human than anyone might have expected, because across from him, in a booster seat, sat a little girl about 6 years old, swinging her legs beneath the table and humming softly to herself while clutching a stuffed bunny. Her name was Lily, and she was Alexander's entire world. She was the daughter he adored but never quite knew how to raise alone. Ever since his wife had passed away 5 years earlier, Alexander had buried himself in work, convincing himself that building his empire was the best way to protect his daughter's future, yet deep down, he knew she needed more than luxury cars and penthouse apartments. She needed love, warmth, a gentle hand to brush her hair and tell her bedtime stories, a voice that wasn't stern with worry but soft with affection. And so, while Alexander sat distracted, thinking about his next meeting, his next deal, his next headline, Lily's innocent eyes wandered across the cafe until they landed on Emily, who was balancing 3 plates on one arm and still managing to laugh with a customer. The child tilted her head, studied the waitress for a long moment, then whispered something softly, though her father didn't hear. Emily approached their table a moment later, notebook in hand, and her smile never faltered as she greeted them with her usual warmth. "Good evening," she said, kneeling slightly so she could be at Lily's eye level, something she always did with children because she believed they deserved respect, too. "How are you today, sweetheart? Would you like something special to drink?" Lily's face lit up. Most adults overlooked her, speaking only to her father, but this waitress saw her. "Hot chocolate, please. With extra marshmallows if you have them," she said eagerly. Emily grinned and wrote it down. "Hot chocolate with extra marshmallows coming right up." "And for you, sir?" she asked, glancing politely at Alexander, who had been silent, almost frozen as he watched the brief exchange. There was something about the way Emily had spoken to his daughter, so natural, so kind, so unlike the nannies and caretakers he'd hired over the years. He cleared his throat and ordered a black coffee, his voice low but steady, though his mind was already unraveling questions he wasn't ready to face. Emily walked away, and Lily followed her with wide eyes, clutching her bunny tighter. When the waitress returned with steaming mugs, Lily accepted hers with both hands, careful not to spill. Emily placed the drink gently in front of her and said, "There you go. Be careful, it's hot, but I put plenty of marshmallows in there for you." Lily's eyes sparkled. "Thank you," she said, then after a pause, she asked the question that made Alexander nearly choke on his breath. Looking up at Emily with all the innocence of a child who had lost her mother too soon, Lily whispered, "Can you be my mommy?" The cafe seemed to fall silent in that moment. Forks stopped clinking, conversations blurred into background noise, and all Alexander could do was stare at his daughter, then at the waitress whose eyes widened in shock. Emily blinked, her lips parting as though she had misheard. "Sweetheart," she began softly, not wanting to embarrass the child, "that's a very big question." But Lily only nodded earnestly. "You're so nice, and you talk to me like Mommy used to. Daddy works a lot, and I don't have anyone to make me hot chocolate like you did. Can you be my mommy?" Her little voice cracked slightly, and Alexander's heart squeezed painfully in his chest. He had spent years shielding himself from emotions, drowning his grief in endless hours at the office, but hearing his daughter's plea broke every wall he had built. His fingers clenched around his coffee cup, his usually calm and unreadable face betraying shock and guilt. Emily felt her throat tighten. She had heard many things as a waitress, confessions from lonely customers, laughter, arguments, even proposals, but nothing had ever hit her like this. She glanced at Alexander, searching his expression for guidance, but he looked completely caught off guard, as though someone had pulled the ground from beneath his feet. Trying to handle the moment with care, Emily crouched again beside Lily and gently tucked a strand of hair behind the little girl's ear. "You're very sweet," she said softly, "and I think your mommy must have been a very special person. I'm just a waitress, but I'll always be happy to talk with you when you come here, okay?" Lily's smile faltered for the briefest second before she nodded slowly, sipping her hot chocolate to hide her disappointment. Alexander finally cleared his throat, though his voice was rough. "Lily, that's not something you can just ask a stranger." His tone was firm, but it lacked conviction. He was flustered, and Emily noticed it, though she pretended not to. She simply nodded politely and excused herself to tend to another table, but inside, her heart was racing. She didn't know why the little girl's words had struck her so deeply, but they echoed in her chest long after she walked away. Alexander sat in silence, staring at his daughter who now stirred her drink absent-mindedly. He wanted to scold her, to remind her that she couldn't just ask such things, but the truth was that Lily had only voiced what he himself had been too afraid to admit: she needed a mother, and he couldn't give her one. When Emily passed their table again later, Lily reached out with her tiny hand and caught the edge of her apron. "Please don't be mad," she said softly, "I just really liked you." Emily crouched once more, her heart aching at the innocence in those words. "I'm not mad, sweetheart," she whispered with a gentle smile. "Not at all." Alexander froze again, watching the tenderness between them, and for the first time in years, he wondered if perhaps his daughter saw something he didn't. The following week passed in a blur for Alexander Reed, but no matter how many board meetings he attended or how many contracts he signed, his mind returned again and again to that single moment in the cafe when his daughter had looked up at a stranger with desperate hope and asked, "Can you be my mommy?" It was a question he couldn't erase, a plea that rattled the iron walls he had built around his heart. He told himself it was just childish innocence, nothing more, yet the memory of Emily's gentle smile and patient voice lingered like a soft melody he couldn't shut off. Lily, on the other hand, didn't hide her feelings at all. She chattered endlessly about the nice waitress, about how Emily had listened to her and made her hot chocolate with marshmallows just right, about how she wanted to visit the cafe again. Alexander tried to redirect her attention, reminding her about school, toys, and the expensive weekend trip he had planned, but nothing dimmed her excitement. Finally, unable to deny her request, Alexander found himself walking back into the same cafe the following Saturday, his daughter skipping happily beside him, clutching her bunny and looking around eagerly until her eyes landed on Emily carrying a tray of drinks. The moment she saw Lily's wide grin, Emily's face softened, and she came over with that same warmth that had unsettled Alexander before. "Well, hello again," she said brightly, crouching to Lily's level. "I was hoping I'd see you soon. Did you come back for more hot chocolate?" Lily nodded enthusiastically, and before Alexander could stop her, she wrapped her tiny arms around Emily's waist in a sudden hug. Emily froze for half a second, startled, then carefully placed her free hand on the child's shoulder, returning the embrace gently. Alexander stiffened at the sight, his protective instincts flaring, but there was something disarming about how natural the moment felt. He opened his mouth to say something sharp, to remind his daughter about boundaries, but the words stuck in his throat. Emily, sensing his discomfort, slowly pulled away and said softly, "Don't worry, I know hugs are special. Thank you, Lily, that means a lot. She looked up at Alexander briefly, her eyes calm, as though she was silently reassuring him that she understood the gravity of the situation. Over the next hour, as they sat at their table, Lily chatted animatedly with Emily every time she stopped by, telling her about her school drawings, her favorite cartoons, and even how lonely she sometimes felt when Daddy had to work late. Alexander's jaw tightened at that last comment, guilt washing over him like ice water. He had given his daughter the world, but not his presence. He had thought money could fill the cracks of loss, but this waitress, this stranger, was showing him otherwise without even trying. When their meal was over, Lily tugged at Emily's hand once more and whispered, "Maybe next time you can come play with me?" Emily hesitated. Glancing quickly at Alexander, who looked as though she had just crossed a forbidden line. She crouched down and said carefully, "Sweetheart, I work here, so I can't just leave, but maybe if your daddy says it's okay, I can visit you one day." Lily's face lit up as she turned pleading eyes on her father. "Please, Daddy. Just one playdate?" Alexander's throat tightened. He wanted to say no, to keep his carefully structured world intact, but his daughter's hopeful gaze and the gentle way Emily waited without pushing made him falter. Against every instinct screaming for control, he finally muttered, "We'll see." Lily squealed in delight, throwing her arms around him before he could change his mind. That night, after putting his daughter to bed, Alexander sat in his dimly lit office at home, staring at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He thought of his late wife, of how she used to laugh with Lily, of how she would be heartbroken to see the loneliness in their daughter's eyes now. For the first time in years, he admitted to himself that maybe he couldn't do this alone. Maybe his empire meant nothing if his little girl grew up without love. A knock on his office door pulled him from his thoughts. Lily peeked in, holding her bunny. "Daddy," she said softly, "did you like Miss Emily too?" The question hit him harder than any hostile takeover or business rival ever had. He looked at his daughter, so small and fragile, and felt the weight of his choices pressing down. "She's kind," he admitted, his voice rough. "But that doesn't mean, it means she makes us smile," Lily interrupted with a wisdom far beyond her years. "And Mommy used to do that too." Then she hugged her bunny tighter and padded off to bed, leaving her father stunned and speechless. Days later, destiny intervened again. One evening, after a late meeting, Alexander decided to pick up dinner from the cafe instead of sending his driver. When he arrived, the place was nearly empty, and Emily was cleaning tables. She looked up, surprised to see him without Lily, and asked gently, "Long day?" He almost scoffed at the question. No one dared to ask Alexander Reed about his days, but her voice was so genuine that he found himself nodding. "You could say that," he murmured. Emily hesitated, then said, "You know, she really loves you. I see it in the way she talks about you. Don't be too hard on yourself." He blinked, taken aback. No one ever told him not to be hard on himself. No one ever dared to speak to him as if he were human, not just a CEO. For a brief moment, the weight on his chest lifted. Before he could reply, Emily handed him a paper bag with his order and said softly, "Take care of her. She's special." That night, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about how easily she had read him, how her kindness had slipped through cracks he thought were sealed shut. Over the following weeks, their paths continued to cross, sometimes because Lily begged to visit, sometimes